Again, we'd like to welcome you to the session. I also want to let everyone know we're going to go ahead and record today's session. We are recording now. I believe it just started. So we will be able to send out a link to the recorded session that you're attending today as well. So you can go back and take a look at it later on. Also following today's session, we will provide a brief survey. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you think. Make sure it was useful and helpful for you today as well. So that'll come out shortly after today's session. Within a few days or so, you'll receive a survey, very brief survey to help provide us some feedback. We hope that you can join us for all of our workshops. We have workshops throughout the semester, each semester. And so we'd like to see you back as often as you are able to join us. I also want to, on your screen right now, you should be able to see the standardized tests cover slide. It says standardized tests, ACT and SAT with the PATHe logo. Today's date being Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us again. As folks kind of jump into the call, I want to remind everyone we are recording today's session, so we will let everyone, we will provide everyone the link to the recording. And if you'll give me 1 second, I will, we're going to make sure I can let our facilitator into our session today, who's going to actually be leading our workshop, talking specifically about ACT and SAT testing. So give me 1 moment. I'm going to make sure I can actually let her into today's session so she can join us. Bear with me 1 second.
It was the morning of February 14th. The man behind the wheel is District 16 congressional candidate Martin Hyde. Throughout the exchange, Hyde name drops the city's mayor, city manager, police chief, and a sergeant he says he's friends with. Multiple times throughout the video, the congressional candidate threatens the officer's job to her and others who responded to the scene. In a public statement released Tuesday, Hyde apologized for his actions, calling his behavior belligerent and rude. Wednesday, he agreed to speak on camera with 8 on your side and had this to say.
I'm making a point here, which is that no one is obviously above the law, but not only is nobody above
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for bearing with us. We've got it all squared away now. So Ms. Debbie Weaver will be joining us here. You should be able to see our screen again, standardized tests, ACT and SAT on the screen. And again, we'll ask everyone to mute their microphones while they're joining us here today until we get ready for questions to come in. The chat box, you can find the chat box in using the little talking bubble icon, and then usually that's where you can type into the chat box your questions throughout the session today. So again, be sure that your microphone is muted while you're with us. Double check that you can see that microphone icon, and then and mute yourselves there. We'll try to help everyone with that as well. So a few highlights on what to expect today, and I just realized I am a few highlights on what to expect today. We will actually cover a couple of different topics that you see on your screen there. We'll start with the differences between the ACT and SAT. We'll go into how college exams are actually used. And then we'll take some time for some questions and answers if we've got any in the chat box. We'll go into then test questions and preparation resources, as well as when to take the ACT and SAT. And believe it or not, there are some proposed future changes for the SAT that we might be able to get some answers to today. And we'll wrap up with some last minute questions and also just providing you some reminders on our PATHe program. The PATHe program, we are facilitating today's session with our partner, Ms. Debbie Weaver, and we'd like to let you know how we can stay in touch as part of the PATHe program after today's session. So with all of that being said, I know Ms. Weaver has been able to join us, and so I'm going to go ahead and turn our presentation over to Ms. Weaver if we're all ready to go. How are you feeling?
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Xavier. So welcome everyone. Give me just 1 second. I just finished working with a student, so I'm moving some stuff off the screen so that I can show you just what you came to find out today, which is all about the SAT and ACT, why these tests are even still important, because I know a lot of people ask me all the time, do I even still need this anymore? And actually the answer is yes, for so many important reasons. So we're going to go over that first. Let me just pull up my presentation to show you, and we'll get this ball rolling. Okay, and let me share my screen. All right. And share. Okay. So you need your permission to share your screen. Okay.
I just unshared my screen here, so are you able to take over yours?
Well, let's see. I'm going to try it again. Technology, tons of fun. I'm guessing that you guys still just don't see my screen.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Share. I'm so sorry, guys. I've done so many presentations with this awesome team, and yet this is the first time it's not working tonight to share the screen. So let me just check my system preferences for privacy, and we will double check. Sometimes when we do updates on our computers, that will sometimes happen as well. So. Okay, I think it should work. We'll try it. I'm so sorry. We'll try one more time.
That's okay. The other thing we can try to do, Debbie, is if I get a hold of, I don't know if it's going to be possible for you to share the presentation with me. I can share my screen and kind of, navigate it for you.
I'm gonna do that real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and add it to an email for you. Okay. And Xavier, what's your email address?
It's xramos@usf.edu.
XRM is in Mary.
xramos.
MOS at
usf.edu.
Got it. Oh my goodness, you guys, a million apologies. This is normally something that we have ready to go and not a problem. It is what it is. We are going to get through.
Well, we get those surprises every now and then.
Let me just go ahead and start while I just sent that over, and while Xavier is getting everything amped up on that end, I will just start by telling you guys a little bit about, number one, why you can even trust anything that I'm telling you. So I started, I've been a teacher now for, gosh, going on like 30 years. And as a classroom teacher, working with students at the high school level, I had a lot of students who would ask me for support with SAT and ACT prep. And to be honest with you, at that time of my career, I would say to them, oh, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about SAT or ACT. Like, it was just one of those things, like I had a very negative experience myself with it as a student, because I was this straight A student who had all the college credits you could imagine. So by the time I graduated from high school, I only had 2 years left to go to college, and I had my bachelor's degree, right? So I was exactly probably the student that is in your household right now. Straight A's, high performer, and yet takes the SAT or ACT and is just sort of like getting mediocre scores. And so I would get these scores. I'm like, this does not represent me. I don't understand this. And I would work with students when I became a teacher, and I would say, there's got to be a way to crack this code. And I started working with Kaplan Test Prep and Admissions. And I actually not only got so united with Kaplan Test Prep, but I actually left my classroom job and started working in the test prep field, because I was like, this is mind blowing how just being able to know a few things about the test makers themselves, how the tests are created, these students who have anxiety and hangups like I did when I was in school, and who don't understand why there's like a disconnect, can now start to feel confident, can go into these tests and find success. And there's really, after I did that, there wasn't a test that I couldn't get a 1600 on or a perfect 36 on. I was like, thank you, finally, So it's just one of those things where your student right now just might be in a situation where they don't know what they don't know. They are just going into this test thinking that it's going to be really, really hard and really overwhelming. And if they go into it thinking that, it absolutely will be that. And it'll be very difficult for them to untangle that from their head. But if they go into it knowing it's predictable,
so if you're saying to manifest, it's going to be good.
There's a perfect approach to it, then they will be able to find. Okay. Can you hear me? I got muted for a second.
Did you mute her?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you repeat though what you had said, because I think somebody else was talking.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, so basically once a student though does know a little bit about these tests, it actually will help them untangle everything in their mind, so they see that it's a very predictable, very straightforward approach to where they can use the content knowledge that they actually are very strong at knowing how to work with, the math content and the grammar content, and they apply it to this test in a way that shows what they know, shows how strong of an academic performer that they are. And now colleges can really get a good idea how an SAT score can match up with the high GPA that they're seeing. So the other thing, of course, is that it does help to weed out, what if there isn't a match? What if students have elevated scores on their GPAs and they really don't know the math content and know the grammar? It creates a better playing field, like a more level playing field of knowing the truth, because there are a lot of very inflated GPAs, because again, there's no criteria necessarily for why a student got an A in a class. If truly, in some situations, if they are a student who's very compliant and very hardworking, a teacher might sometimes pad their grade even when they're struggling, because they feel for them. And it's a tough situation, but we have to figure out how to work through those things to create though a dynamic that every college can look at a test or look at an applicant and say, oh, this applicant truly is academically strong, and here is some proof. The SAT and ACT are able to provide that proof so long as they know their content knowledge. if they know their content knowledge and they just have anxiety, or they just have like a hang up where they just don't know what to expect, those are things we can fix. Those are things that we can actually like show them, no, it's very predictable. Let's look and see how you use that formula in a very systematic way to get to the right answers. How close are we to maybe we might have my presentation up here in a second, it looks like.
Bear with me 1 second. I'm trying to get it to a present view, but we do have it.
Because let me tell you, parents and students, you will totally change the way that you look at the college admissions process if you don't look at each one of these different pieces of the puzzle as being hurdles, but look at them as ways that you can work them to your advantage. Having an SAT or ACT score, even if a college does not require you to put that on the application, still works to your advantage. In, unless the college flat out says we will not look at your score, most colleges will say, yeah, you can put it down, and we will look at it only if we feel like we kind of want to look at it. Most colleges in Florida are still looking at the SAT and ACT in some way. So if nothing else, you want to still be able to have a strong SAT or ACT score because of Bright Futures. And I know that many of you have heard the words Bright Futures Scholarship, because whew, that is one of the gifts for Florida students. Strong GPA, strong SAT, ACT score, and some volunteer hours, and we'll just pay for you to go to college for free.
All right, Debbie, so I was able to get it into a PowerPoint file actually for better viewing on my end, for better presenting. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, let's get started. Well, let's get right into, let me share the screen here, and we should be good.
There we go. Now, here is going to be the interesting part, is like how to, okay, I need to take over controls of your screen real quick.
Okay.
So that I can flip, flip through it.
Right.
Do you have a little button on yours that says, like, give remote access to Debbie?
Well, so no, because I think, so I'm just sharing the presentation is not in Teams, right? It's just on my monitor. Does that make sense?
So do I just need to tell you flip and you can flip to the next?
Yep.
Okay, flip. All right, so why do these tests matter so much? Go ahead and flip to the next screen. The next screen should have, there we go. Because when your kid is applying to schools, or if you are the student who's applying to schools, imagine last year, more than 41,000 freshmen applied to get admissions into University of Florida. I actually think one of the latest numbers I saw was more like 46,000. The applications are overwhelming for college admissions officers. So they have to have a way to weed those 41,000 down. The easiest way to do so is to go ahead and look at the quantitative numbers. So that would be GPA and SAT, ACT scores. So go ahead and flip to the next screen. By doing so, they can eliminate a lot of people who just don't even qualify in terms of meeting the GPA requirements or the SAT, ACT scores. And then they still, though, are going to have, let's just say that eliminates half of the people. That's still, they have to get it down from like 20-something thousand down to only the 6,500 seats that are even available for them to make, possible for your student. So that's why these quantitative numbers are still so very important, and they really represent your student in a great way. So flip to the next screen. So they make you stand out, flip. And here's the biggie. If you do not know this information, please write this down. Your student, if they have a strong GPA of a 3.5 weighted GPA or higher, they would be eligible for that component of the Florida Academic Scholars Program. Florida Academic Scholars, if you have a 3.5 or greater and you have a minimum SAT or ACT score of, in this, and you can see here on the screen, ACT is a 29 minimum or SAT of a 1330. And you may meet one more requirement, which is to have 100 volunteer hours, then your student would qualify for a 100% college tuition paid scholarship in the state of Florida. Now, most schools at this point, even many private schools, have bought into the Bright Futures program and they are on board. So there's only very few schools that do not play into this. So definitely all of the big schools, you know, University of Florida, FSU, UNF, USF, FSU, all of the biggies for sure, they will honor this scholarship if your student has the GPA, SAT, ACT score, and the volunteer hours. If they don't quite have that high of the GPA, or if they don't quite have the requirement they needed for SAT or ACT, they could actually qualify for 75% college tuition scholarship through Bright Futures, and that's called the Medallion Scholars Program. You only need a 3.0 weighted GPA, and you only need a 25 on the ACT or a 1210 on the SAT. And the reason I even use the word only, these are attainable scores for students who do have the aptitude. You know, they are in at least Algebra 2 is the minimum they're going to need. Like, they have to have made it all the way through Algebra 2, because that's the type of math content that they're going to see on the SAT, ACT. It's going to be Algebra 2, Algebra 1, pre-algebra, and geometry primarily. A little bit of trigonometry on the ACT, but mostly the majority of the questions are going to come from Algebra 2 or less. And then, of course, they have to know their reading and grammar and whatnot. So we'll get into that in a second. Okay, go ahead and flip to the next screen. So basically, it's all about, like, show me the money. If you want to really understand why SAT and ACT are still very important, it's very much about getting money for scholarships. And it's not just Bright Futures. There are a lot of different scholarships honored by different universities across the country. So if you're like, my kid doesn't even want to go to a Florida school, they want to go out of state. I work with so many students who are like, I want to go to Auburn, but I want to make sure that I qualify for the out-of-state scholarship that they're going to give me. I need to have a blah, 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 you know. And so, like, this one kid I was working with, he needed a 1340, not a 1330, which is what he needed for Bright Futures. He needed 1340. So, you know, we can definitely see where there's power behind these numbers. Another thing is that sometimes your student does not need it for going to college. Maybe they just need their SAT or ACT score for qualifying as a concordant score so that they can move past FSA. So if FSA is a hang up for your kid and, like, they've not been able to pass that requirement, that is a requirement for graduation. So very often they'll use the SAT or ACT as a concordant score. And those numbers are sometimes not too high. So they're very attainable and very achievable. And they will replace their high school equivalency test parameters. So, all right, next screen. So again, there's very good news. These standardized tests, they do have a predictability. In order for a standardized test to be truly standardized, there needs to be one categorically, indisputably correct answer, and 3 that are absolutely indisputably wrong. So if that's the case, and you know that there's, like, one that follows a formula that is right, and these 3 follow a formula that are wrong, we can make them into a predictable formula, and there's kind of a method to the madness. Skip to the next one. So then what is the difference between these exams? Because we're actually going to look at some problems tonight from these exams, but in general, big picture, if this is something brand new to you, I want you to understand that these exams are very, very similar, but they do have some slight differences that we just want to take a look at. So go to the next screen. The SAT and the ACT both have 4 sections. You'll notice for the SAT that you've got reading, and this is the correct order, by the way, when your child sits for this test, they will have reading and then writing, which is grammar. Then they'll go into a math section with no calculator allowed. And then they'll go into a section where they do get to use math, use a calculator for their math. The ACT has what they call the English section. That is equivalent to the writing section on the SAT. So it is grammar. Then they've got a whole math section, all calculator allowed on the ACT for the math. Then they have a reading section, and then they have what's called science. Now, science, you'll notice, is not tested on the SAT, but let me be very clear. Science is not really tested on the ACT either. It's not really a section where the student needs to know any real, like, content about science. What the science section is testing is logical reasoning. It's critical thinking skills. Can you look at a chart? Can you look at a graph and take some text and make logical conclusions and connections between the text and the graphs? Now, what do they use as the content? science. So that's where the word science comes in, is that they will talk about chlorophyll and how they did an experiment and how, you know, the scientists looked at these different levels of chlorophyll in these plants. But are they really testing you on, do you know what chlorophyll is, or do you have to know how photosynthesis works? No, it does not test you on that. So the science section is really another, it's again, critical thinking, logical reasoning section. The way that the SAT tests that is they build in some of their charts and graphs into the reading section, into the grammar section, and of course, the math is going to have some charts. But the that is not the case on the ACT. They don't put any charts and graphs into the reading or grammar of the ACT. So as you can tell, though, if it's not on the SAT, it'll somehow be, you know, if it's something that's like, well, the SAT doesn't do science, the SAT still builds in the skill. So your kid is still going to be tested on like logical reasoning and critical thinking abilities. So what I put here with these little stars where it says no calculator, and that's a star, and then little star by the science, is that this would be like differences that you have between the two. The ACT does not have a no calculator section of math, whereas the SAT does, and the SAT does not have a science, whereas the ACT does. Then we've got timing for, actually go back one more. Then we've got the timing for these, which is very important to understand the differences here. Because when we're talking about similarities and differences, one of the key differences is not what's tested, it's how much time you have for what is tested. So on the SAT, notice they give 52 questions for reading and 65 minutes. Look at the reading section over on the ACT. They do have a few fewer questions. They have 40 questions instead of 52. But look at how very little time. They only give 35 minutes. So just to show you a comparison, the reading section on the SAT, your child would get 13 minutes per passage. That's plenty of time for reading. On the ACT, they're only going to get 8 minutes and 45 seconds to read and answer 10 questions. So it's very, very fast. So then a lot of people are like, oh, well, then that's it. Sign me up for the SAT. I want all the time that I can get. But here's the thing. The way they ask the questions on the ACT, you don't need 13 minutes. They ask them very directly, what is the main idea? Where is this detail found in the passage? It's very cut and dry. The SAT is going to have them pull back the layers more. Let's analyze the story. Let's pull back. And that's why they give them 13 minutes. So again, it really comes down to both of these tests have these great reading comprehension questions, but it's going to be what is the preference of format. So we really recommend that a student takes both the SAT and ACT, and actually that you do a little bit of prep before you just completely throw in the towel on one or the other. You really want to know the strategies before you just pick one. The writing section of the SAT is equivalent to the English section, but look at the difference. 44 questions of grammar on the writing of the SAT in 35 minutes versus 75 questions of English on the ACT in 45 minutes. So again, a lot of students just based on that would go, oh, SAT wins, it's fewer questions and I get a little bit more time. But truthfully, after I work with students, again, they mostly will tell me they prefer the ACT format. So again, it really comes down to personal preference. I do have one student right now who loves the SAT better. And in comparison, I can tell you I have about 10 students who prefer the ACT to that one student. Now we have a total of actually like over 50 students with whom we're working right now on both SAT and ACT. We have a really large team, you know, about 11 of us working with students, but it is overwhelming how many students really, once they learn the strategies work on both tests, but they just tend to lean more towards ACT. So I'm just kind of like giving you my professional feedback, but still you got to try them both, right? The no calculator section is probably what gets students the most on the SAT. You would be very, very shocked. And I actually kind of almost challenge you to ask your student who might even be in pre-calculus right now, ask them to do mental math. Ask them to subtract 752 minus 138. And so these kids, oftentimes they're in like pre-calculus, calculus, really high level classes. And you're like, how could they not do something so basic as subtracting two numbers? Truthfully, this generation, they've been very, very reliant on their calculators and have not always been fully given all of the strategies for doing math on paper. So I just would just say, you know, that is a real challenge of the SAT math section for my students. The reason I had just stopped teaching at 6 and I had to jump on this call with you guys is I was working with a student doing SAT math, and he really was struggling because he couldn't do the mental math. And one of the questions was down to 25x equals 75. He couldn't divide 25 into 75 evenly like that. And so I said, well, think about quarters. You know, there's how many quarters are in 75 cents? And he was like, oh, 3. But again, doing mental math is something that is not natural for a lot of our students nowadays. And this student is in calculus right now. Annie has an A in calculus. So I just want to like try to give you the idea that the reason that your child might be struggling with these tests could come down to content. It could really come down to like skill building abilities. And then again, ACT, it's 60 questions, 60 minutes. This is pretty comparable. It's about a minute per question on both tests, and they do get a calculator the full time. And then again, finally, the science is just going to be a quick 35-minute section of critical thinking. You'll see they're about the same length of the test, about 3 hours each. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Scoring wise, the SAT is going to combine the reading scores with the writing scores and give you one score that combines those two sections into a 200 to 800 point score. And then on the math, they're going to combine those two sections, and you're going to get one score that combines both the math. So you're going to see numbers that are probably somewhere in the like, you know, 500, 600 range. Those tend to be kind of the middle range numbers. And then you would add that reading score to the writing to get a total score that's going to be somewhere between 400 to 1600. Now I'm going to tell you what kind of scores would be considered good scores in just a second. Go to the next screen. The difference for the ACT is that they break all 4 sections apart, and you get an individualized score for English, which is grammar, then math, then reading, then science, and then they just take an average, and it'll always be out of the 36. So what is a good score? High scores that you need for bright futures, this is probably the range you want to look in the most, is these 2 bright futures numbers. If your student is going to be qualifying for the 100% scholarship, you want a 1330. That would be a great score on the SAT, or a 29 on the ACT. Those are the minimum qualifiers. For a 75% scholarship, you're looking at a 1210 or a 25. And obviously anything higher than any of these scores, so up in the like 1400, 1500s on SAT, or up in the 30s on the ACT would be exceptionally good. But if you're just wondering like, well, what's going to get a college's attention? A student at least really needs to be in the thousands on the SAT, so 1,000 to maybe an 1190. That will at least get them to go, oh, okay, they know some things. There's some foundational knowledge there. Or a 21 to a 24 on the ACT. And again, obviously anything above that would be stellar. Colleges do have their own parameters for what they consider to be a good score. So these are sort of averages, but I can tell you, I've been doing this since well, I graduated in 95, and I've been doing test prep since 2003. And I can tell you from working with lots of admissions colleges, your student will find a place if they have at least 1,000 or even just at least a 20, 21. But to really get a college's attention, you're really hoping to try to hit these numbers that are the minimum for bright futures. So like 1210 or 25, whew, that would really get their attention. Those kind of scores are top notch. All right, next slide. Okay, so we're going to stop there for just a second. If there are any questions before we go into some of the challenge questions, this would be a great time to like let us know before we get into showing you what the actual tests look like and what the questions would look like. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I can see anything in the chat.
No questions yet in the chat.
Okay.
If you have any questions, feel free to...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or open your mic up if you'd like to speak them in just a minute, for just a minute.
Yeah. And again, maybe you're still trying to process all of this. So if you think of any questions, because what I don't want to do is just have us staring at a blank screen, type them in the chat, and I promise you, we have done many of these workshops together, and we're very good about looking in the chat and getting to your questions. So as things pop up, please let us know. let's go ahead and start working on the challenge. So let's look at what these tests really do look like and see how your students would need to, you know, approach these. We're only going to do maybe like 2 or 3 problems of each, and this goes pretty fast. So let's roll. So on the, this is a real problem from the SAT writing, which is a grammar question. On the grammar, you want to focus on just the answer choices first. So this would be a strategy that I teach where I'm like, let's look at the answers, and we've got life, comma, A, life, semicolon, A, life, colon, or life, period, A. When our students are working on this, the first thing we tell them is you have to know your grammar rules around punctuation. And if you know that a semicolon, which is letter B, and a period, which is letter D, serve exactly the same function in a sentence, you can actually then mark off B and D. So go to the next slide. You'll be able to mark off B and D. And then you're left only with 2 choices. So now let's even just say you don't know how a colon works and you're like, I'm not really sure. You could even flip a coin and you're already better off. But if you do know how a colon works, which is what you would learn in prep, a colon must have a full sentence in front of it. Well, let's just see if letter C would even work. To counter the rise of fast food and fast life, period. Could we put a period there? No way. So letter C would never work. A is the winner. Flip to the next slide. And flip again. And keep flipping. So we have now found that A is our answer, and you can go to the next slide. So just again, knowing a little bit about the grammar. So now let's look at number 21. If you've done some prep and you know how the formula works, when you look at number 21, you would see that it says, nevertheless, these, similarly, these, still these, or just plain old these. My students would tell you in 2 seconds, it's D, and they would be right. And the reason that they would be right is because when you have 3 transition words, like nevertheless, similarly, and still, or one with no transition word, it will 100% of the time be the one with no transition word. Done and done. So we didn't even have to read the sentence, and we're already able to see that the answer is D. And then we look at this next one, and it says, officials of the value, comma, officials, comma, of value. You notice here that all 4 of these answer choices have the exact same words, and they just moved the comma around. So the first thing that, again, my students would tell you, they'd say, well, Debbie, we have to start with the one with no commas at all, because we know something about these tests, and very frequently, they just want you to choose the one that just flows without any sort of pause. So let's try letter H, and it says, these tests convince the officials of the value of using the Navajo language in a code. And sure enough, that flows beautifully. We don't need a breath. We don't need to stop. We need to just keep rolling, and we have found our answer, and we move on. Now, is it always going to be the one with no punctuation? No. But knowing that is a place to start will get most of your students, 50% of the time, it is no punctuation. So knowing that little trick will at least help them lean toward what is the most popular answer, and then they just go from there if they need to like revise. All right, next slide. So same thing would happen here with this one that says which one is not acceptable. We call these clues questions because we have a clue in the stem. It says, find the one that's terrible. Find the one that is not acceptable. So we could certainly just start with A and read it and go to B and read it. But what do we notice about A and C? Oh, A and C are exactly the same answer. So we can cross off A and C. So you can go to the next slide. A and C are out. So it's between B or D. We also would know a little bit about the test maker, and that is that an unacceptable sentence would be a run-on. So let's just look and see if letter B would be a run-on, because that looks like it has no punctuation. Outside Navajo communities, such rare exposure is rare. This greatly contributed. Yep, that's just a run-on. So B is our not acceptable run-on sentence. And then, and you can click to the next slide. And then now this one, this bottom one, it says it's success, or it is how we pronounce letter F. It is success, that success, this success, or the Navajo code success. Again, if your child does prep, they're going to learn this. Whenever you have 3 pronouns, which are just words like it, that, this, and then you have a very formal specific noun, the answer will always be the formal noun. Or I shouldn't say formal noun, just any noun. And notice that letter J says the Navajo code is very specific. We're going to go with that. It's a 100% rule, and we can move on. So knowing a little bit about the test makes it to the point where we don't even have to read sometimes some of the grammar stuff. We just have to know enough about the answer choices to know how to move smoothly and successfully through it. Okay, next slide. Now let's do some math. So with math, we're looking at this equation and
Debbie, you're muted for some reason. Somehow it.
okay,
there you go.
There we go. So I'm not sure where you cut off, but I will say that with the math questions, your students might go, oh, math is kind of overwhelming to me. I don't know where to start. We would always build their confidence by saying, actually, you do. You do know some things about math and you do know where to start. And what is given to you, I don't know why it keeps clicking me to mute, but but in any case, with this one, the equation tells you we've got ax plus 3 squared equals 36. If x is -3, and that is one solution of this equation, then what is the possible value of a? We already have been, that's where we say thank you, SAT, because we already know a few things now. We know that we can plug in this -3 and at least make this a one variable equation. You'll click to the next slide. There we go. And so now we've plugged that in. And so at this point, the only thing we really need to do, we could absolutely solve this using math, right? We could just crunch it out, get the squares, crunch it down to what a equals. We also can use what's called back solving. And back solving is where you will use these answer choices and plug them in. We typically recommend starting with either B or C. So if you'll actually click to the next slide, we're going to start with B. We're going to plug in this -5. And you can see here that we've got -5 times a -3 would be a positive 15. 15
Apologize. It looks like Debbie might have been disconnected from the call. Let's see if she'll join us back here in just a moment. Here she is. You're back. All right. Wow, technology is really.
I tell you, what a crazy day this has been. Okay, so we're doing our math over here. We can see that 15 plus 3 is 18, and that squared is way bigger than 36. So we're going to need to go smaller than that. So go ahead and click to the next slide, and you'll see that we'll start and click again. We're going to eliminate that. We're also going to eliminate, keep clicking again, the -11. That's way too big. If we put in a -11, that would really give us something too huge. So we're looking at just -1 or 0. Click to the next slide. We can actually tell immediately that we could never have 0 work because that would just make it 3 squared. And 3 squared is going to be way smaller than 36. So we don't even need to do the math. We know that C is our answer and we're done. So back solving can be a really quick thing where you really only have to do one problem. Like just by knowing that -5 didn't work, I knew that -11 didn't work. The 0 was clearly, obviously it wouldn't work. And then boom, -1. We certainly could do this the long math way as well. So there's lots of ways to solve a math problem, but this is a way that we're talking about showing a student how to look at it, use systems, and get to the right answer faster, because part of this is the speed game, and you have to be able to be fast at math to get through all of the problems. Okay, next slide. Let's look at another math problem. We do geometry, lots and lots of geometry questions on the SAT and ACT, and they will
We apologize, you all, for technology. Just really, let's see. Let's get her back on, and we'll continue. Here we go.
It's just a tons of fun tonight. Okay, so we can tell they give us a lot of information here at the bottom of the screen, but we don't really need a lot of this. We just need to realize when we look at this that the SAT and ACT love to test on isosceles triangles. And if you look at this, you can see a beautiful isosceles triangle right here. And if that's not obvious to you, it would be after doing some prep, I promise. And you can confirm that it's an isosceles because it says MP is equal to PR. If these two sides are the same, then that is an isosceles, and it means that these two angles are also the same. So if you can skip to the next slide real quick, it'll fill in some of this data. We do know that a straight line is 180. Go to the next slide. So then if we know that that's 180, then we also know that this big angle here is 120. And if this angle is 120 and all of the angles in a triangle are 180, we then know, if you go to the next slide, that we just have to divide what's left. So 120 from 180 is 60. Divide that by 2. We know that each of these is 30 degrees. And that's what it asks. It said, what is QMR? QMR is 30 degrees. Done. So the only thing we had to know here, we did have to know content. We had to know what an isosceles triangle, how it worked, how many degrees are in the angles of a triangle or in a straight line. But knowing that really made this a very simple, straightforward question. By the way, on the SAT, as we talked about the differences between the tests, one thing that is a difference, the SAT also has what is called grid-ins. And grid-ins are where the student does not get multiple choice. They sometimes actually on, I think it's 5 questions on the first section and like 8 questions on the next one, they actually have to write in their answer. So they write in the number 30 and then they bubble a 3 and bubble a 0. And that's how it's graded. So that's something that's very different from the ACT. The ACT is all multiple choice. The SAT is not. Okay, next slide. So this is where once you know these strategies and you're starting to think like how you know the test makers create questions, then these answers almost start to float off the page. I mean, you notice when we were doing the ones that were on grammar, we really didn't have to read much. We could just look at the answer choices and go, oh, it can't be B and it can't be D because those are the same. So knowing your strategies is so very critical. And again, knowing the strategies is knowing your content. So no doubt about it, they do have to know their stuff. Next slide. So then how do you prep? You can either prep on your own. There are so many free resources online, like use Khan Academy, go to YouTube, type in how to ace the SAT. I mean, you will find loads and loads of free resources. So don't feel like you have to buy into any sort of formal prep option. Where prep is really going to be very, very meaningful is if you know that you have a very unmotivated student, like they're not very motivated to do things on their own, or they really need that guiding hand to like help them walk through the strategies, know how to pace it out. Then you want to take advantage of the sort of prep that's happening for free at your school. Many, many times there are prep options happening at your child's school. Ask about those. Or work with an official test prep company. So like, for example, Learning Labs, which is my company, this is what we do all day, every day. Quite literally, I wake up early in the morning and I start working on test prep with my students who are doing dual enrollment college. So they have holes in their schedule in the morning. I teach them test prep and then they go to school in the afternoon. Other kids, they get out of school after their morning and they come to work with me in the afternoon and my team. So this is something where if you want to make sure you're working with people who like know these tests inside and out, I'm not even going to say like, oh, only Learning Labs. Absolutely not. Sylvan Learning Center, Huntington, Kaplan, for example. I mean, as I'm Kaplan trained, Princeton Review, there's a lot of test prep companies out there. It's really going to be about who you feel is a good fit for you and the type of kind of representation that they have, right? Like, so we get a lot of students who sometimes who will say, yeah, I had another test prep tutor, but he was kind of rude, or, you know, he really made me feel uncomfortable, or she was always late to all of the appointments or something. That's unacceptable. So you want to make sure you have a really good connection, because these, you know, our kids become family to us. So you usually are going to be working with them for a minimum of 2 to 3 months. And that brings us to the next question, timing. So let's scroll to the next page. What would be a good timeline? If you have taken, so if you or your child, I should say in this case, if your child has taken Algebra 2, even if they're a sophomore right now, and they're like, yeah, I'm a sophomore, but I'm done with Algebra 2, or I'm in it right now. After Algebra 2 is complete is when you want to start test prep, as soon after Algebra 2. And that is because we don't need calculus on this test. We don't need all these like statistics and all that. We do need Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, pre-algebra. We need those skills to be fresh in their minds. And you want to jump on getting this out of the way well before senior year. Senior year is too overwhelming with so much going on. So ideally, or I shouldn't say ideally, regularly, very frequently. Most students are finishing up Algebra 2 as a sophomore, and so it's usually around their junior year that they start to prep with us. So, you know, I did not update this slide. It really should say starting now, spring of 2022 now. I haven't updated the slide, I guess, since 2 years ago. But basically, if you're a junior, whether you've had Algebra 2 or not, if you are a junior, let's go. Let's not play around. You want to get started with test prep as soon as possible. I would say you actually could get started in April, and that would be preparing for the June exams. Because at this point, it's really late in the game. If you're like, oh, but my SAT is next week, and I was really hoping to learn some cool tricks in a week, I'm just going to be really honest with you. I get phone calls all the time from parents and students, and it's like 2 or 3 weeks before the test, and they want to have me masterfully augment their child's scores in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks. Taking the SAT or ACT is the same. It's like equivalent to like, you wouldn't want your kid to try to prepare for the major leagues or, you know, like their biggest, most important competition for sports in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks. This is going to take rigor. This is going to take like learning, practicing, going over and over and over again. Because even as many times as I have told and, you know, help students learn those tricks I just told you, until they've done them on their own week after week after week after week, that is when it finally, ding, amazingly clicks. So test prep is going to be a 2 to 4 month investment usually. And that's where a student is working 4 hours a week, 2 hours on math science, 2 hours on reading grammar, and taking a weekend practice test for 2 to 4 months. Not going to lie, that's the investment. But if they work either on their own or with a tutor 4 hours a week, that's what? 30 minutes a day, and then Fridays off, right? And then they take a practice test on the weekend, and they do that. I don't know why I just said 30 minutes a day. 1 hour a day.
You guys. No, Adam.
They're helping me with my work.
No.
Hey, I can hear somebody talking. Okay. So Monday through Thursday, 1 hour a day, and then the weekends. Then that is what it's going to take to really get them to their scores. So if you're taking a look at this, notice you want to get them started, then they'll test. I really need to update this slide, but basically I want to tell you this. Right now, you want to be focused on the June exams. So the March SAT, too late. It's going to be in like 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. I mean, you know, go online, do some YouTube, great, like learn a few things, but you're not going to see the big gains unless you're preparing for like the May 7th SAT and the June 4th SAT or the June 11th ACT. That's my best professional advice to you. So start prepping now for the June exams. And then there'll be another July exam for ACT. And then there's not another one until August, September. So you want to try to get in now to prepare for June, or you want to try to get it in June to prepare for August, September. You can go ahead and flip to the next slide, and we'll probably actually skip it. Seniors is just like, let's go. You need to start immediately. For Bright Futures, seniors, you can actually qualify all the way through the June exam. So you need to try to take everything that's given between now and June. The only thing that's being given, though, that you could sign up for would be the April ACT. Again, you only would have like 3 or 4 weeks, but try to do something. Or the May SAT or the June exams. Okay, next slide. Listen, if you want to know if these things get results, absolutely. Average score increases that you see after prep are somewhere in the like 150 points on SAT and about 4 points on ACT. These are averages. Let me tell you, I have worked with so many students who came to me with like a 900 score on the SAT, and they got Bright Futures with a 1210. So if you don't think it's possible, take it from someone who does this as their day job. We can make the magic happen, but the kid has to be willing to show up ready to play. Like, let's go. Let's actually like take this seriously, get hungry for those gains, and let's really put our best foot forward. Same thing on ACT, 4 points. That's our average, but we see students, one of my favorite ones is this one kid, he went up 14 points. We have made miracles happen for these kids, and it's not just us. look for the people that you know in your circles who could help with test prep. But certainly if you want to know the people who, I'm telling you, we know these tests inside and out, we know all the tips and tricks, then you want to work with maybe like, again, a Learning Labs or a Kaplan or a Princeton Review. Seek out help and learn these tricks, because it's not just about, I almost hate saying the word tricks. These tests do require academic knowledge. Your kid cannot be lacking in math and do well on the math, period. They have to know math. They cannot be someone who doesn't know how to speak English with proper grammar and know the difference between who and whom. They have to know all these things to do well in these tests. But again, there are a few tricks that we can actually teach you to bypass some things. So hey, you want to have every advantage you can get. Okay, next slide. I hope you guys are getting pumped up about just knowing that like magic can happen. This is actually one of our students, Abby. I actually named one of our practice tests after her. We always change the names of the tests, so the students they would have to work a little harder to cheat. So we change them to, like, this test is called SAT Abby. But you know, Abby is now at University of Florida. She went from a 1090 to a 1350. She got 100% scholarship for Bright Futures. She studied with us for 12 weeks. So these are some of our success stories. And again, we don't have a lot of time tonight to go through this. So next slide, but I just want to let you know, lots and lots of students do benefit. And I'm sure that every single person doing test prep out there has their success stories too. These are just some of the members of my team. We actually have even more staff members than what you see here, but we do work 100% on Zoom. And don't ever let online learning, as much as it's been a little bit quirky tonight where we've like bounced in and out, we don't really have trouble with Zoom. We get on, we do Zoom, we have a great session. It's very private, one-on-one. And we also do have classes that are phenomenal where you can get a little bit of a discount on the rate by joining in a class where you might have 3 to 5 other students in the room with your student, but it's incredible and it's very personalized and it's a great experience. Go to the next slide. And this is just saying, like, if you wanted to get a hold of me, if you're like, I have questions for Debbie, I want to know things that are particular to my child, write down my email address, debbie@learninglabstutorial.com. I am happy to, after almost every time we do one of these PATHe program workshops, I get quite a few emails where they're like, okay, so my kid has this and they're part of the tennis team and they do this and this. What do you think for prep? And I'm happy to write out for free just a little bit of feedback for you on like what I would say is like, it's almost like a free consultation. And I just let you know what I think your plan should be. So write down my information. You can write down my phone number all day, but I can tell you I teach almost nonstop. As you notice, I had to jump on this call very, very quickly. And in fact, I had to cancel 3 tutoring students tonight to be able to jump on this call with you guys. So we had to move this to another day. Honestly, if you need to talk to me on the phone, we can do that, but you need to text me and we need to set up a time, because probably if you call me, I will not be able to pick up the phone because I'm teaching. So just, I just like to be really transparent about that. So that office number is also a text as well. So, and I think that's pretty much all we had. We were going to also talk about some of the changes to the SAT, but we wanted to stop here and just see if anybody has any questions, because let me tell you, the changes to the SAT are only going to affect students who are currently freshmen right now, who are going to be sophomores next year and whatnot. So I don't know that it will even necessarily apply to anyone in this group, but I'm happy to answer questions about the new SAT because it's going digital. Do we have any questions from the peanut gallery?
Looks like we've got 2 questions.
Okay, it says, how much is it and how to reduce test anxiety? So I'm assuming that the question about how much is it is related to test prep more so than the cost of the test, but I will answer both of those questions very quickly for you. The cost of the SAT and ACT is around $30 to $50 per time that you take it. So, you know, it depends. I would actually say wager it being about $50 for every time your student takes the SAT. And they should take the SAT, and by the way, same for ACT. They should take both of these tests a minimum of 2 to 3 times. Every public school in Florida, or I should say most of them, all give the SAT for free to juniors in March. So if you didn't know that, your kid is probably, if they're a junior, taking this test for free in their public school next week or between now and the end of March. Some Private schools do as well. So ask, because the SAT just has agreements with a lot of the schools where they just give it, and it does count. It counts towards college admissions. So it's always worth taking that one. The ACT has those same agreements, but mostly it seems like with private schools. If you wanted to know if there's a better one of the two, by the way, SAT and ACT are equally respected by colleges across the country. It used to not be that way back in the 1950s and 60s, but guess what? It's 2022. Either test is highly respected by all colleges and universities. So no worries there. The cost of taking test prep is going to be, let me tell you, we're on the low end. Most test prep is going to cost you $80 an hour minimum. Some of the people that I know out in the field also charge $150 per hour for test prep. We at Learning Labs actually only charge $55 an hour, and that's just to cover the cost of me paying my teachers very well and getting you materials. So we're actually really a break-even business. I wish I could say that I lived in a beautiful big mansion because I'm making so much money off of test prep, but I can't stomach charging $100 an hour, $150, even though we are so worth it. And I can actually tell you that a lot of parents I work with, they're like, oh my gosh, you need to up your prices. I'm like, I can't do it. So anyway, but $55 an hour is how much it costs. And it is a minimum of 32 hours. So the rate would be $1,760 would be the minimum that you should plan to invest, $1,760 if you were working with us for 32 hours. If you did our class, it's $1,460. So you save $300 off of that. You still get the same amount of content. And in fact, you get 40 hours instead of 32 because your child is part of a small group class. So that kind of answers both of those questions. And we test all of our prep in our classes and in our private tutoring is SAT and ACT so that they will be equally prepared for whichever tests that they want to take. Test anxiety. It's a very big issue for sure. We talk to students when they're part of our program about how do you overcome that, because no doubt about it, I will give you an example. A student I just worked with, he is doing phenomenally. He's been doing really great on our practice tests each weekend. He went to take his ACT last week, but he had never taken one before for real. He's taken like 4 of them with us, but he'd never taken one for real. He said, Debbie, I got out of my car, I walked in and I started shaking. I couldn't stop trembling. He said my hands were just shaking and shaking and shaking. And I kept trying to grab my hand, my writing hand, to be like, stop. And he said, I just couldn't focus because I was shaking so bad. And I was like, did you do the things that we talked about? And he goes, no, I didn't. I said, you know, you got to go by the school, look to see where you're, you know, even if it's a school that they go to, be like, okay, this is the day I'm going to be coming to this school, taking my test, kind of get a lay of the land of what it's going to be like. It's almost like rehearsing it in your head so that before you get there, you've already done it a few times. Also, anxious energy has to go somewhere, right? And I said, did you bring like a little trinket? Because I was telling them, like, bring a little trinket with you, like a little stone, like a stone, or maybe their girlfriend's ring that they wear around their neck or whatever. But like, did you bring a trinket? And he's like, no, I didn't. Because sometimes like holding it or squeezing it or like, you know, rubbing the little, so we have like, oh, I don't have my little worry stone, but like little worry stones, almost like you like put your worries in this stone. I know that some of these things might sound like foo-foo or whatever you want to call it, you know, to you, but students tell us all the time that just having a way to go, no, I am not going to be anxious. I'm going to put this energy into this, and I'm just going to like squeeze it out, right? Like I'm squeezing, and then I'm like, let's go, let's focus. But the big, huge part of it is test anxiety will be greatly lessened. It will be greatly decreased if they do prep, because when we are going through these prep scenarios, that kid I just told you about, again, he didn't do a lot of the things that we told him to do to like prepare. He also stayed up too late the night before because he was getting nervous. He didn't go to bed early enough. We give them a lot of different ways to try to calm them down before testing, and to realize it's just another day. It's just another day. If you don't do well, you can take it again the next time it's given. It's just another day. But one thing I can tell you is that most of the students will come back to me and they say, but you don't understand. My parents said if I don't do well on this, then I'm not allowed to prep anymore. Or if I don't get this kind of score on this, then they don't know what they're going to do with me. And there's a lot of students that say it comes back to how they feel pressured by their parents. So no judgment. But I just want to tell you, your role as a parent of saying, hey, kiddo, I really want you to give it your best shot. I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, there's another one if we need another one. It's okay. But go and just freaking crush it the best you can. And if you get nervous, it's all right. It's just a test. It's okay. This is not the end of the world. We can absolutely do this again. And they'll be fine. Because the majority of our students actually say that just by going through this and building their confidence, they walk in. Sometimes I'll tell them, like, put on some aviator glasses, and like when you're walking up there, just be like, hey, y'all, I actually know what I'm doing today because I did prep, man. I am ready. And I was like, you just need to be the coolest cat there because you know more than 90% of the other kids who were sitting there who didn't do diddly squat to get ready for this test. You're going to crush it. You're going to do amazing because you know what you're doing. And that is usually the feedback we get is they're like, yeah, I walked in with my aviators and I was like, I am the boss of this test. I'm like, that's right. So test anxiety, though, again, it's really mostly going to go down by just them feeling like they've already looked at like 10 of these tests. So that when they go in, they're like, it's just another day of doing another test. They all look the same after a while. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I would love to talk with all of you about like your freshmen and what changes are happening. I will talk about the SAT changes in a second. We have more freshmen. Do juniors take the ACT for free? Some schools do give the ACT for free, but not many. I don't know if like the College Board has made some sort of deal with schools where it's like, financially beneficial for them or something, but most schools will give the SAT, but the ACT, for example, with 2 of my students, they are taking it for free in their schools. One of my student is an Orlando student and another student is in Tampa, and they are taking it for free in their schools. So you kind of have to just ask. So at your school, go to the guidance counselor and say, what tests do you give for free that count, that actually are going to be able to be published to colleges? And they'll say, oh, we give the SAT for free to juniors, or they will sometimes, if your kid's a senior and they still haven't, gotten the score they need, they will sometimes give them a free pass to take it again as a senior. So ask about that as well. Let's see, it's skipping around here. What do you tell the teens to stay motivated and to prep for the test? Well, one thing for sure we tell them is like, your parents are paying for this. So there's a lot riding on the fact that like, they're going to expect to see gains. And we know that we can get you the gains. We can help you get those gains if you do the assignments we tell you. We do give them a little bit of homework afterwards, little drills. And they honestly, most students come to us, they are very motivated. They want to feel confident on this because listen, they're the ones who are going to have to go and take it. And they're like, man, I just want this to feel easy for once. I'm like, well, then let's go. Let me show you how to do it. So that's like a very loaded question. Like I could give you lots of different psychological things that we do to motivate them, but it really does come down to, we're very focused on finding their insecurity points and trying to develop confidence in those areas. That is the hardest part to motivate a student who doesn't feel confident. So like if I was working with this girl and she said, I'm just not good at math, I'll never get this. She shut down before we even got started, right? She already felt insecure. So there was just no way until we built up her confidence. So then we started doing some problems and giving her easy wins, right? Like, well, let's look at this problem. What do you know about x plus 3x? And she's like, oh, that's 4x, duh. And I'm like, what? Duh. I work with students all the time who don't know that x plus 3x is 4x. Good job, girl. Give me a high five right here on the, like on the camera. And she's like, wait, you work with kids who don't know that? Like, are they stupid or something? And I'm like, they are not stupid. We don't use that word. But I was like, but they clearly don't know as much as you do about x and 3x. So, building up confidence, no doubt about it. It breaks down the walls. It also makes them understand that we care about you as a human being. And that's the basis of all things in life. It all comes down to, what is the quote? Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is the darn truth about it. If you go in and just like, I'm super smart at SAT, and if you listen to me, you're going to learn all the things, they're like, whatever, you seem snobby, I don't like you. But if you're like, hey, oh, I heard you're on the tennis team and cool. Well, you're also going to be an SAT superstar. Are you ready? Let's go. And if you just build in these relationships, we do not get off on tangents. We stay focused on the game, which is the SAT or ACT. And yet I do know if they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I do know if they have the prom coming up. You know, I know some things about these kids because you know what? They also will log on and their kitty cat goes across the screen. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you have the cutest kitty cat. Oh, what's her name? You know, so, but motivation comes from a connection with another human. That's how people are motivated. And that is the true meaning of good teaching, is having a connection with other human beings. So that is what I would say.
I love that, Debbie. I love that. And you're inspiring me, and I don't even, I'll stay away from the SAT and ACT. We have a question, I think, from, I think it's Alicia. Alicia, if you'd like to turn your mic on and ask your question.
Yep, I actually have two questions. One was, when are the classes offered? And the second one was, how would I be able to get a copy of the recording so that I can share with my daughter?
Absolutely. Now, probably Xavier can answer that second question. I think that they do always make these available, or at least our slides. I think, though, even the recording is available to you all after this. So
Yep,
if you want to address that real quick.
We'll send that out as a YouTube link with everyone, along with our survey, within a few days or so.
Okay,
Perfect.
thank you.
And then classes. So our classes are, the next classes starting will be in April, and that's getting ready for the June dates. And I think it's Tuesdays and Thursdays. I believe it's 3:30 to 5:30. But another thing that we sometimes have happen is we'll have a set of students who all want to work together, and they're like, hey, could we get the class rate if you could set up a class for us on Mondays and Wednesdays instead of on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Heck yeah. Like, so we publish that we offer it on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but if a group of students who are all friends come to us and they say, we'd really like to do it on Mondays and Wednesdays at this time, do you have teachers available? Yeah, we can definitely do that. So that's kind of another benefit.
So just to follow up on
to
that,
answer the question too, I don't know if this is I'm so sorry that the classes we run everything on the half hours. Like our hour starts at like 11:30 a.m., 12:30, 1:30, 2:30, 3:30, and it goes as late as, well, we're supposed to stop at 7:30 p.m. at night, but I tutor usually pretty late into the evening, so at least till 8:30, if not 10:30 sometimes. Again, we really try to be available for the students as much as we can work around their crazy schedules. But here's the reason why we typically try to cut off by 7:30 or definitely no later than 8:30 is that there is a point of no return with your brain where your brain is just like, I can't do math at 8:30 at night for the SAT, because your babies are getting up so early in the morning for school. They're done. Their brain is toast by, like, honestly, usually like 6:30. So that's where I would recommend that, you try to do a class earlier in the afternoon. I'm sorry, you had another question.
I did. I just wanted to know how many students equate to a class.
Great question. So we keep it open where it could be as large. The largest class we've ever run online is 9 students, and it was fabulous. We still knew all their names. We still gave them personalized attention. But 9 is the highest we'd ever run a class would be 9. Most of the time, so like we had a class that had 8 students in it, and I actually split it into 4 and 4. So like whenever I can keep it under 5, that is my goal, is to usually try to keep it under 5. Here's the thing though, we could run this class with 100 people and they would still get great benefit from it. They just, they need to know this information. It's so valuable. But personally, because it's my company and I can do what I want, I try to keep it usually under 5, but sometimes it could be as large as 9, but that's still a baby class. That's still small. It says, if your freshman was finishing Algebra 2, would you have them take the test as a sophomore? Heck yeah. I'm not kidding you. I worked with a kid this summer who she was just finishing her freshman year, and she prepped with us over the summer. She already has the score she needs for Bright Future. She got over a 1300. She got a 1330, and she's done. She's like, can I just stop? And I'm like, I mean, if you have the score that you want and you're good to go. So she wasn't looking to go Ivy League. She didn't need like a 1500. She got the score she needed for Bright Futures. Her mama was happy. Check, check. And she is a sophomore. Well, she is this year a sophomore, but this was last summer, right? So she was a freshman going into her sophomore year, and she was done with her SAT already. So yes, you can absolutely do that. It's really good to have them test or at least start prepping while the Algebra 2 information is still fresh in their mind. I was just trying to see if there's anything other than the changes, because I do want to talk about that real quick. If the student takes both the SAT and ACT and does well on one of them, should they concentrate on increasing their score on the test they did best on? Yes, that's a great strategy. So we usually require that they do a baseline test to start. If they've like never before seen an SAT or never before taken an ACT, we have them do a baseline test. And if they have like a natural tendency toward one versus the other, then yeah, let's just focus on, you know, like one student I work with, she's like ACTs all the way. That's all they want to work on is ACT. And then I have other students who are like, nope, I don't like the pace of the ACT. I love the SAT. And we only do that. In the class itself, I will tell you that we teach strategies that work on both. But then on the weekends, when they take their practice test, they get the choice. If they're more focused on ACT, then they take an ACT practice test. If they're more focused on SAT, that. Most of the students who come to us are kind of like, I don't know, or maybe they're even kind of like even, like their scores are pretty even. Then in that case, we just say, you know, sign up for both, take them both, and they just kind of go with whatever schedule we tell them. So if we're like, well, this weekend I want you to do SAT, and then maybe another weekend we do ACT. To be honest with you, the way that they break out the testing schedule, SAT and ACT are always like a little bit off from each other, right? So like, we'll focus mostly towards ACT because we're getting ready for the February 12th exam. Okay, that's done. Now we're focused a little bit more on SAT because the March 12th exam is coming up. Oh, now we're back to ACT because the April exam is coming up for ACT. So we kind of base it all on like what exam is next. And if the next exam on the docket is ACT, we're going full guns a-blazing. We're going towards the ACT and our focus is on that. And then as soon as that test is done, we're like, all of our focus is on the SAT. And the kids are like, all right, here we go. But the strategies work for both. And I actually get a little bit miffed when some tutors are like, no, you have to like 100% focus on one. That is not true. I've been doing this since 2003. You can absolutely apply these strategies to both tests. But no doubt about it, if your kid is already leaning a little bit more towards one than the other, heck yeah, let's focus on just that one. For sure. By the way, the class, I do want to mention too, unless you create your own private class, I do have parameters around, at least for our class, what level of student can join. So if your student is performing under a 1,000, I will not let them in our class. If your student is performing above a 1,200, I will not let them in our class, because most students are going to fall in that range of like 1,000 to 11 something. They have the aptitude, they have the foundational knowledge. We don't really have to remediate them. If your kid is under 1,000, this is no disrespect to them, but they need remediation. They don't know some basic things about maybe how fractions work. They forgot how exponents work. That's just not, I mean, we mention it in class, but we don't spend like 4 or 5 days going over how exponents work. We just expect that you already know that because you just finished Algebra 2. So in that case, private tutoring would be the only option that we would recommend for a student who's below 1,000 or who's already at a 1,200 and above, because those kids need a different type of enrichment and focus than a student who's kind of just like right there in the middle, and it's just gotta trust the process. And I'm just gonna tell you, that's the way it goes. But if you're like, oh, well, my daughter already has a 1,250, but so do most of her friends, well, then her and her friends should join the class together. Like we could create one for them. But the general one that we give would be only for kids in that like kind of middle spot who are stuck. They're stuck. Anything else we're missing? Because I do want to just mention about the new SAT.
Did we mention how long it takes to get test results?
Oh, okay, so I'll answer this in 2 ways. If you're taking a test with us, we turn around the test results within 24 hours. That's just for baseline tests. In case you're like, well, I don't know how my daughter would do on an ACT. I'd love to know. We would give her an ACT practice test, and within 24 hours, she would know the results. If you're talking about the real exam, because some of you might have had your kiddo take the real ACT on February 12th, those tests usually come out in 10 days. And if you go to the ACT website, in fact, it said the first scores will be released on February 22nd, which was yesterday. And yet I've been blowing up my kids' emails and texts going, what's your score? And they're like, we don't have them yet. So the SAT and ACT can do what they want, obviously. So this last round of ACT was supposed to all be released yesterday. But normally it does take, usually it's within 2 weeks. That's the short answer. 10 days to 14 days, you usually get your scores back. Same thing with SAT, by the way. It's usually 10 to 14 days. But I will tell you this, last summer, the June exam for the SAT, they had some sort of, they tried to blame it on COVID, and maybe it was, I don't really know. But it took 7 weeks to get the scores back. We were like, freaking out. We're like, did they lose your grid? Like, what happened? But it wasn't just one kid. It was all of our students, not one student. And we tutor kids across the country. So actually, I tutor a kid in New York. I tutor a kid in California. We tutor everywhere. But most of our students are in Pinellas County, Florida, most of them. So anyway, it was a long wait, but I've never seen that. It's always going to be like 10 to 14 days usually. How can I sign up my son for the ACT if his school does not offer it? Great question, because you should not assume that the school is going to take care of any of this for you. It's very actually rare. It's only, usually for the March or maybe April exam. But you go to act.org, and the very first thing in the middle of the page says register for the ACT. In fact, if your kid has never taken an ACT, or if they're planning to just take the next one, you only get 2 more days before registration closes. Well, they're going to keep it open for late, but they're going to charge you $80 after that. So in the next 2 days, you want to go to act.org and register your child for the April 2nd. Now, again, that's not really enough time to prep. I am not going to lie to you. That's only 1 month. That would only give them maybe 16 hours of prep. But hey, 16 hours would be better than nothing. And then they would prep again for the June exam, which is the next ACT. For the SAT, you go to collegeboard.org/SAT. collegeboard.org//SAT. And that's where their registration is. And their next test, it's too late for March because it's already only like 2 weeks away. Their next test is May 7th. May 7th, you could possibly get some good prep in because you're going to have the whole month of March and April. So you would get 2 months. So that's a good idea. So, especially if you have a senior, please, please, please sign them up for all the things like right now. My son took the ACT and has a good score. Should I assume that he'll do well on the real ACT? Yeah, it's a pretty good assumption that if they're already kind of have a good aptitude for it, that because all of these practice tests are usually real released practice tests that have been given before. So if they can do good on one that's been given in the past, they should do great on one that's coming up soon. However, like I said, that kid that just told me that his hand was shaking and he had to hold onto his hand, you never know on test day what parameters are going to come into play. For example, when it really does count for some kids, they go into shutdown mode. Oh my gosh, they just freeze up. Other kids, when it's game day, they do better than they did on the practice test because they know it counts. So it's there's a lot of psychology. Also, there are sometimes if the school, the AC went out and it was burning up hot that day, or if it was too cold in the room and they were shaking because it was freezing, or if the proctor did not give them 5-minute warnings like they were supposed to, that's huge. Maybe there's no clock in the room. Maybe their stomach was growling because they forgot to take snacks and they felt really embarrassed because the kid that they actually have a crush on was laughing at them. There are so many things that go into a good test day experience. And that's why I tell the kids, I'm don't be the kid with grumbly stomach. Don't be the kid who walks in late. You can't. They'll kick you out. So there's so many things that play into a good test day experience. Getting enough sleep. So, but yeah, we could certainly say that if they did good. The ACT NCR. Yeah, so NCR means it's not being recorded. So that is a great question that you bring up. NCR means that it's usually a test given by the school for free because they're trying to see if your kid could maybe get out of doing FSA. So a lot of students are given the ACT to get an idea, could we get them out of this reading program they're in? Or can we just go ahead and use it as a concordant score for FSA? And the ACT is the one that they like to use for that, not the SAT. So Yeah, ACT NCR is different, but it's not different in the sense that it is still like the same structure. It is still the regular ACT. They typically don't have them do the science when they do that one. They usually just have them do the math, reading, and grammar. And it would not count for college. So no colleges would even see that score. But at least you would have it as a baseline. So it is a really good baseline score. Yeah, same scoring. Yep. It is the same scoring as the regular ACT. So for example, I'm working with a little girl who had a 14 on the English of the ACT NCR, which is the one they give in school. She needed to get a 19 to get a high enough score to get out of her reading program. And I'm sorry, she had a 14 on the grammar and she had a 16 on the reading, but she needed an average score of those two of a 19 to kind of like, I would say, clep out, you know, like to be able to like get out of that class. And she's just not there yet. So her whole point with us is she's like, I don't even know if I want to go to college, but I want to get out of this reading program. So the ACT is very, very useful in that way, in that it can help you get your kid out of programs that they don't want to be in, because they're like, hey, if they can handle the ACT, which is a college level test, they don't need to be in your little reading program. So
I want to make sure really quick, Alicia, your hand is still up. I don't know if that's a phantom hand or if you do have a question.
I'm so sorry. What was that for me?
Oh, it was for Alicia. I see a hand
No,
up
it's
from
a phantom
Alicia.
hand. I don't know
Okay.
how to, yeah, take it off.
That's
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
I'll take it off. No problem. I didn't want to. Thank you.
The phantom hands are raising. Oh, that's funny. Okay, good. Yeah, your son got a 33 in English. That's a near perfect score. Congratulations. That is phenomenal. Yes, yes, yes. Hey, maybe your son can become a teacher for me. I'm always looking for new recruits. So I feel like I have to always say though, and by the way, in case some of you are like, wait, do you have children teaching? No, we do only have, our staff is all adults, and we do have some of our youngest teachers are in college. They're like sophomores or juniors in college, but everyone's an adult and everyone is exceptionally good. That you have to qualify with my team of a 90 percentile or higher score. We do not play around with that. Like, nope, you got to be one of the best of the best. And even that, I had this one guy, he applied to work with me. He actually had a perfect score on the ACT, but he had no charisma, no ability to be a good mentor. And I'm telling you guys, the name of the game is connection. You have to have good human connection, because these kids come in very, very beaten down. They feel very afraid, nervous, and very insecure. And we want to turn that around. You got to have good human connection. So I'm proud to say all of our people are very good at all the, like, it's not just cheerleading, guys. It's like, you don't just pump a kid up with like fake accolades. They have to earn it. So, you know, but we will give them easy wins sometimes, be like, hey, what do you know about this? And they're like, I know this. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. But then from there, we are able to give them a little bit harder question and a little bit harder question. So, okay. Changes in the test for those of you who have freshmen, or I guess some of the sophomores could maybe be affected. But so these changes to the SAT, nothing's changing for the ACT right now. So everything is still just paper and pencil. And for the foreseeable future, they're still planning to move forward that way. But the SAT has just announced about a month ago that they are going to be moving in 2024. 2024, and honestly, it sounds like it's going to be more like the spring of 2024. So that's why I say it's really more for kids who are like freshmen right now. It might impact them, to a digital format. Instead of it being 3 hours in length, it'll be 2 hours in length. It will all be given online. And the way that it will work is, if any of you have ever taken the GRE in the past like 10 years or so, the GRE is the grad school equivalent of the SAT. Okay, so if you want to go to get your MBA or whatever, you got to, well, MBA, you're probably going to actually take a GMAT, but if you're trying to go to get your master's program, GRE is online test, and the SAT is going to start mimicking that style, which is called computer adaptive testing. So what this means for your kiddos is that right now, when they take an SAT, everyone gets problem number one, looks the same as problem number one for every other student. The new SAT, problem number 1 might be the same because they're going to start them right in the middle. Like what should be kind of like an average medium level difficulty question. And if they get it wrong, they're going to drop it down to a really easy question and just see if the kid can try to get it right. But obviously, if they do get it right, it's not going to count as much as it would if they had gotten a harder question right. So computer adaptive is very based on like, okay, if we're going to start in the middle, you drop down, you do some easy questions. If you get those right, we start building you back up. Eventually, you get another question wrong. Oh, it drops you back down. But now you're not dropping way down. You're dropping just a little bit down and then back up. So the computer will not necessarily give every student the same number of questions. It's just going to turn off. At a certain point, it will just turn off if it's like, this kid just isn't getting it. Like they're getting them all wrong. It's not going to make them do a battery of like 75 questions if they're getting them all wrong. It'll maybe turn off after, and I don't know what that number is, right? So it decides once it feels like it, by the way, it is based on a percentage. So after you get a certain percentage wrong, it'll just turn off. But if you get a certain percentage right, it will also turn off. And that's good news for you because it could be that it turned off because it's like, we have all the information we need. We know that we're going to give you this score. Now, for some of us, it's like, wow, but how do you then know, like, what does a 1400 mean on the computer adaptive test versus a 1400 where every student was given the same exact questions? Well, I can just tell you this. They have done some masterful work to figure out the different algorithms of how these tests work. So it's kind of where you have to a little bit say trust the process. But as someone who can sometimes be, you know, I like to think that I like to ask questions, right? I like to question authority to some extent, right? So I do always ask, like, are you sure? Are you sure you know that this is the best? Well, they've been doing testing on this new style for a number of years. They wanted to roll it out even actually, I think like 5 years ago, but it wasn't quite ready. But COVID has made it where it's like, you know what, we can do this. And so they're really they're turning it into what's going to be like the GRE. It's computer adaptive. So it'll be shorter. It will allow for a calculator on the entire exam. And if your student doesn't have their own calculator, there will be one provided for them even within the computer interface. Other changes to the test are that the reading passages right now are very, they're systematically always 2 columns in length, but going forward, since it's going to be this online thing, instead of having them scrolling through like 2 columns of text, they're going to give them shorter chunks and then just a few questions, and then another shorter chunk and a few questions. Whereas right now they have to read a lot more text and then answer 10 or 11 questions. The SAT is going to move to where it's short chunk, question, short chunk, question. So, which is actually kind of more in line with how the kids have been doing the FSA. They usually do them a little shorter. Let's see, math. So I told you math is going to now be all multiple choice and all on calculator. Trying to think, there's a couple other things that I want to make sure you know. So the scores will remain the same at a 1600. They will be able to take them at their school or at a testing center. So if they take it at their school, it will be with a computer, like in a computer lab. They can be taken on, I believe they said tablets, laptops, or desktop computers. All 3 of those will work. They will still provide accommodations for those who need them. So if your child qualifies for extra time, they would still get their extra timing accommodations. Like if you have your kids on a 504 plan or an IEP, and they will still qualify them for Bright Futures. Because again, all of the parameters will stay the same. Again, what's going to be different is that now it's taken on the computer. It will be shorter. They will get their results faster because they don't have to go through actually putting a Scantron through. Calculators will be allowed on all the math sections. And basically their big pitch is that it'll be a more flexible and secure format of a test because they are giving it in smaller chunks. But that's kind of what we know so far. I'm going to put in the chat the link to all the information that has currently been provided by the College Board. That link will take you to, they'll even have a video that'll show you, this is what the changes are, here's what you can expect. So that link is really valuable if you need more information about the changes. But again, it really isn't, nothing's going to change if you have a sophomore, junior, or senior right now. It really probably would just be for those of you who have freshmen. And only if you have freshmen who want to hold off on testing until 2024. And then someone had said, well, if it's reduced hours, is it reduced number of questions? Yep, it's going to be, it's really going to be, it could be very different number of questions for every different student who tests based on the adaptability, right? So they'll adjust it based on that. If my daughter takes a paper version, will she be forced to take a digital SAT? Not for college admissions. So her SAT scores will still be good for as long as, so colleges aren't going to say like all of a sudden, oh, no, we don't like that SAT that's on paper. I can guarantee you that no college is going to care that if she can go ahead and knock her score out of the park right now as a freshman or a sophomore, she's done. She is not going to have to worry about it. Now, whether or not their school might like say, hey, we're going to have all of you guys take the SAT today in school on this day. Yeah, you know, she would be pulled out of class to do that. But certainly you could talk to her counselor and say, we're not really, we're done. We're not interested in that. And that could be her day off of school. She could just take that day off because again, most schools that are going to provide it as a requirement, they're going to pull every student out of class unless you've already told them ahead of time that you don't need it. And I have to tell you, these rollouts don't usually go smoothly the first time. I mean, look at this. We are pros at using technology, and we've had how many hiccups at the beginning of this presentation? And I'm not kidding. This is my day job. I use technology like this all the time. So just know that when the SAT rolls out as a computer adaptive test, computers are gonna blank out. They're gonna like have to start over the test. Like that. No doubt about it, because I have been through so many changes. So I started test prep in 2003. I remember when the GRE went from being paper to being on computer. Oh my gosh, so many issues. They'd go to the Pearson Testing Center and the computer wouldn't work, or it would shut off early and they wouldn't give them their score, and it was crazy. We just have to know that's what we're getting into. I hope that by 2024, you know, aren't we supposed to be living in like the Jetsons times where there's, you know, flying cars and stuff? So hopefully by 2024, everything's perfect. But we know better than that. Technology is always glitchy. It is pretty cool though. If you've never taken one, they have some free little things you can do to like test out. Like go on and try to do a practice GRE. I can't remember the website now, but it might even just be with Kaplan, but just like do practice GRE questions. And it's kind of neat. It'll give you a question and then you'll notice if you did poorly because it'll give you a really easy question next. And you're like, whoops. And then if you get a really hard one, you're like, go me. Look at me. I'm leveling up. So I love your Jetsons. Thank you, Xavier. Okay, so colleges should accept the old paper. Oh, yeah. Yep. 2025, I see no reason. Oh, yeah. 2025, they'll accept the old paper copy. Sure, for sure. Yep. I mean, listen, colleges are the worst with getting on board. If anything, they're going to be like, we don't trust this new digital SAT. We don't even know what to do with this. Do you remember a few years ago when the SAT tried to change itself to a 2400 test? So it no longer was out of 1600. It was out of 2400. And they did that, I think it was between the years of like 2006 and 2009 or something. And they had to abandon that because colleges were like, what does it even mean if a kid has a 2100? Is that a good score? We don't know. Like, you know, if someone tells you, I got a 1500 on my SAT, you're like, dang, you are killing it, right? That's really good. But if someone gets a 2100, I don't know what that really means. And so colleges were not really sure if they liked this new format. So eventually the SAT had so much kickback, they had to just cancel it. I have a feeling, if anything, you know, don't be worried about your student. Don't be worried at all about your student taking a practice or a paper-based SAT. Colleges still love things old school. They are going to love that old SAT that they know what it is, they know what it means, they know what to do with it.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. We have still a few minutes left, but I'd like to kind of touch on the PATH program and give us our contact information as well. I kind of provided our email address a little bit earlier as well. But this is an example of what our program offers to all of you, to our students and families in Pinellas County. Part of our mission, or our mission, is to provide the equitable, flexible, and attainable pathways to promote access to higher ed for students in Pinellas County. And we have a vision to really increase the number of students attaining post-secondary degrees and other credentials in Pinellas County, promoting economic mobility, skills gaps, filling skills gaps, and meeting workforce needs. So we work with students all across Pinellas County, all schools, high school, college, middle school. We do have special partnerships with Pinellas County Schools and St. Petersburg College in particular, being in Pinellas County. We do work at the College and Career Center, so if your student's school has a College and Career Center, certainly encourage them to participate and to attend the centers and to meet with the managers there. You'll see counselors from the PATH program there as well. And then at the college level, we do have a partnership with St. Pete College, where students are able to enter St. Pete College and transfer to USF St. Pete campus in a seamless option there as well. Here's our contact information. Myself and Danica are currently hunkering down as the PATH staff, and we are available for you. Here's our email addresses, our website, our Facebook, and our Instagram. We are on Facebook and Instagram as well. So please reach out to us. I also provided our program email address, which is stp-path@usf.edu. So certainly please reach us there. Our survey, we'd love to hear from you. If you take your phone camera, this is going to be one way. Just take your mobile phone and pop up the camera and scan the QR code you see on your screen there. It'll bring right up a quick survey for you that where you can kind of let us know how you're how you felt about today's presentation. I'm also going to, though, if it's easier for you, speaking of kind of old school and sort of the old traditional ways, here is the link, the old URL here for you to be able to access the survey there as well. We'd love to hear from you again. Let us know how you're doing, and be sure to join us for our additional workshops throughout the semester. We also want to kind of let you all know of a couple things. Well, one particular event we have coming up in March. It's a new event for the PATH program that's called Fries and FAFSA. And it is a way for us to be able to connect with our students and families here this semester about FAFSA, making sure that you all understand what the FAFSA is, why it's important, how to get yourself to complete it. We're doing the event, and I'm going to try to pop in here one of the graphics as well to kind of help us out. But the event is really intended to get our students and families out to connect with our counselors. We're going to have not only PATH counselors there, but we're going to have financial aid counselors from USF, from St. Pete College, from Pinellas County Schools, and from Eckerd College, all there teaming up to be able to work with you all on your FAFSAs and other financial aid information, right? It doesn't have to be just FAFSA specifically or solely, but this is going to be certainly something that we'd like to invite you all to. The link that I provided there brings you to the web page for the event. The graphic is not quite translating. It'll take a little bit longer than we'd like because our technology is a little bit sleepy today. But otherwise, go to that web page. You'll have an RSVP there for the event. There's 2 dates on March 22nd and March 30th at SPC. And for attending, you'll get vouchers for free French fries from our partners at McDonald's. So it's a really great way to come out. It's in the evening time. So, you might need a little snack there after school or after work before getting home. We'd love to see you and be able to work with you on your FAFSA there as well. Let's see here. Let's move on to my last screen. Here it goes. So with that, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. Miss Debbie, do you have anything else to add tonight?
The one thing I would add is about anyone who's hoping that their child is going to qualify for a scholarship like Bright Futures. Most of these scholarships, regardless of which state, you might even be like, oh, I know I'm going to be looking to another state. Most states do have something similar. And volunteer hours is a huge part of that you do not want to wait on. So getting your child to get their volunteer hours done starting freshman year, like have them volunteer at hospice, have them volunteer at the public libraries, have them get, they can even work for like the SPCA, you know, cleaning out dog beds or whatever, you know, like I'm not kidding. Go get them their volunteer hours as soon as possible, because it kills me sometimes when I'm working with a student who has like a 4.3 GPA, a 1350 on the SAT, but they don't have their volunteer hours, so they're not going to get bright futures. And I'm like, oh my goodness, no, we really don't want to see that happen. They work so hard academically. Let them get those, you know, it's hard to get 100 hours in like a month, but 100 hours over the course of 4 years, just an hour here, an hour there, 100 times, you know, no big deal. And in fact, most of the places where they're going to volunteer are going to usually do them in 3 to 4 hour stints. So they're going to knock them out pretty quickly if they can just start early enough. I see this constantly, and I really hate to think of anyone who qualifies for money not getting access to that money.
Absolutely. Time
and then
key.
The last thing I would just say is that prep is important. The only time I would say it's not important is if your kid already has the score they need, great. But if they don't have the score they need, any sort of prep that you can get them. Like I know in Pinellas County, there was just last weekend, they offered some free workshops, free. So any student who didn't take advantage of that, what a shame, you know, like that's a great little edge that it could give the students. So just try to make sure that you build in that time, and don't wait till the last minute. We can't make miracles happen in like a week. You can make the miracles happen in, you know, 2 or 3 months ahead of time. But you know what's great about all of you who are here tonight is that you clearly already get it. You get that this is something you got to start thinking about early. And that is where you need to truthfully congratulate yourself, because you don't even understand that you are in like the top 1% of the parents of the world, because so many parents do wait till the last minute. Don't do that. It's a gift that you are giving your kid, that you are so proactive. So thank you. I'm saying it from as if I'm your child, because your child is going to thank you. They don't realize it just yet, but they will. So
absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Thank you, Debbie, for your expert guidance tonight. We really appreciate your time, and everyone look out for the recording, for the link to the recording, and look out for the survey, and we hope to see you at one of our next workshops. Have a great evening.
thank you, everyone.